Yo, the NBA trade deadline is officially over, and man, that was wild. I sat here last week and said Mike Conley Jr. was going to be the biggest name that was traded at the deadline. Kyrie Irving is a Dallas Maverick. Russell Westbrook is no longer a Los Angeles Laker, and Kevin Durant is a Phoenix Sun. Teams that were thought to be title contenders are no longer that. Other teams who we thought were no longer in the title race are now title favorites. This is just wild, man. Let's get into it. We'll talk about some of the biggest trades and those that I think will affect the second half of the season. First off, the biggest trade of them all, Kevin Durant heads to Phoenix. He is now a Phoenix Sun. If you remember back to KD's trade request back in the summer, Phoenix was actually a destination he wanted to go to. What kickstarted it all off was, of course, Kyrie being traded to the Dallas Mavericks. In my last video, I broke down the Kyrie to Dallas trade. But one thing I mentioned was that the scripts actually flipped. Luka was doing all the heavy lifting for Dallas, and he was all by himself having to do all this work. Now Kevin Durant is going to be by himself out there in Brooklyn, and he's going to have to do all the heavy lifting that Luka did with Dallas before Kyrie got there. Sure, Kevin Durant looked at the situation. Kyrie's gone, knows I don't have a team that's going to win a championship. This isn't where I want to be anymore. Reports are he talked with Brooklyn's ownership, and they basically came to an understanding between both parties that if something's available out there that's a good trade package, that Kevin Durant wants the trigger pulled. And his preferred destination was Phoenix. There was conversation between the GMs, even between the owner. Phoenix was really trying to keep Mikal Bridges out of that trade. Brooklyn was not going to have it. If Mikal Bridges was not included in the trade package, there wasn't going to be a trade, so they had to give him up. But you got to consider it a win for Phoenix. They got to keep Booker, they got to keep CP3, they got to keep DeAndre Ayton, and now you bring in Kevin Durant. That roster of those four right there, if they could stay healthy, they have to be considered a favorite in the West. And yes, absolutely, their bench is going to be a weak point, but you can fill that in with players that are either going to be waived or bought out. But for Phoenix, this puts them right back in the conversation for title favorites. And yes, they gave up a lot to get Kevin Durant. They had to give up part of their relatively young core with Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson involved. Obviously, players they would have loved to have kept, but you're not going to get Kevin Durant for nothing. Like, they had to give up something, and that was what the Nets wanted. You know, it's funny because when you take a look at Phoenix, they were considered one of the best teams in the league last year and a favorite to win the championship going into the playoffs. And then they run into the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic, and we all know how that ended. And it's almost felt like they've never really recovered from that Game 7 blowout. Even into this season, it just seems like they aren't the same team. They're still that team from that Game 7 blowout against the Dallas Mavericks, and they've just have that same, I don't even know what to call it, that same juju that's just, they can't get over the hump, and it's just carried with them through this season. I don't know if that's the whole DeAndre Ayton situation with him and Monty Williams not quite getting along. Reports that he really doesn't want to be on the team anymore, didn't want to sign with them. Maybe it's the fact that Chris Paul is getting older and he is no longer the player he was a couple of years ago. Still a solid player that I think any team would want a player like him on their team. He is no longer a top 5 point guard that he was just a few years ago. And it just seems that the teams that were just below them last year have all taken steps to get better and really have surpassed the Phoenix Suns this year. Denver finally got healthy, and they're showing what they are. They're first in the West right now, and clearly the better team than Phoenix. Memphis's young core has matured and gotten better with time, and they're looking like more of a title contender than Phoenix. Dallas is still sitting there in the West. Yes, they lost Jalen Brunson, but Luka's still there, and of course they now made that trade for Kyrie Irving, so that just made them better. Golden State is still the defending champions, and when healthy, they're still a huge threat. The Clippers bringing Kawhi back along with Paul George, beefing up their roster. Pelicans, young players are taking steps forward. Zion's looking like an absolute monster. CJ McCollum is fitting in well. Ingram's in there doing his thing. It seems that all these teams that were below them last year have all leveled up in a way, and the Suns have kind of just been left behind. But with one middle of the night, while everybody's asleep trade, all of that was flipped around. Kevin Durant is back in the Western Conference. The Phoenix Suns now have 2 of the elite scorers in the league, along with a veteran leader in their point guard. And just like that, the Phoenix Suns are your title favorites again. Chris Paul no longer has to be that second option that has to carry the scoring behind Devin Booker. Chris Paul just needs to be there to facilitate things, keep things running smoothly, be that veteran presence. I think that's going to take a lot of weight off him, that he can just play his game without having to be this playmaker that he had to be a lot of times, especially in the playoffs. And for Kevin Durant, I mean, we've seen it. He's actually one of the star players that plays well with other stars. We saw it in the beginning of his career when he played in OKC alongside James Harden and Russell Westbrook. Eventually James Harden left, but even him and Russ got all the way to the finals. Then we saw in Golden State, he was able to play right alongside Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and he fit in perfectly. And even in Brooklyn, I know it was a failed experiment, and that era of him and Kyrie and Harden is a huge failure, yes. But when him and Kyrie were on the court, they were something like 20-2. Like when they were both healthy and actually playing on the court together, it worked. I think he's the perfect player to come into the Phoenix Suns right alongside Devin Booker, right alongside Chris Paul. He's perfect. He fits right in. When we look at this from the Brooklyn Nets side, obviously we got to address that the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden experiment was just a massive failure. I mean, they invested so much into it. They gave away basically all their draft picks. Really, they let these players choose the way the organization was going to be run, from running out Atkinson to bringing in Steve Nash, then not liking Steve Nash, getting rid of Nash, putting in a different coach. It just got to be a mess. Then all of a sudden, rumors that they don't like playing with each other. James Harden asking for a trade. You had all the summer drama. It was just a mess. Honestly, I think when Kyrie asked for that trade last week, that was the last straw. I think they were just over it, done. They had put up with all that stuff too long, and they said, you know what, this is time. Let's get rid of it. Let's blow it up. So looking at the Brooklyn Nets from today on, they're not in that bad of a situation. Obviously, with the Phoenix Suns trade, they were able to pick up Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, 4 unprotected first-round picks. Those are big. And then you got that pick swap in 2028. When you look at the big picture of this, for what they offloaded James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant for, is basically 7 first-round picks. For those 3 guys, you would think you could get a huge haul. 7 first-round picks. I mean, Rudy Gobert by himself almost went for that. But they've got some picks to play with. They've got some good young talent. So they're not necessarily in a horrible situation for the future, but there's no denying that the Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving era of the Brooklyn Nets was a complete failure. Looking at other trades, the Lakers finally, after about a year and a half of blaming him for just about everything that went wrong with their organization, even when it wasn't his fault, Lakers finally got rid of Russell Westbrook. Now they got to find a new scapegoat, and if I'm Malik Beasley, I would just delete all your social media, bro. Like, they probably you probably the next one. But breaking it down, Russell Westbrook gets sent out to the Jazz along with Juan Toscano-Anderson and Damian Jones and their 2027 first-round pick. Mike Conley gets sent out to Minnesota to reunite with his old partner Rudy Gobert. The Lakers bring back D'Angelo Russell. They also get to bring in Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt. Going into this deadline, the Lakers needed 2 things: bigs to help on the inside and shooters to go around LeBron James. And with this trade alongside the other ones they made, like from Mo Bamba, the Lakers actually came out of this trade deadline looking pretty good. They restacked their roster. D'Lo is having one of his best years shooting the basketball. Malik Beasley is a good shooter, solid shooter out on the outside. Jared Vanderbilt is actually someone I was surprised that the Jazz gave up. Thought if the Jazz were trading in a big man, I thought it was going to be Kelly Olynyk, but they decided to go with Vanderbilt, and that's a great pickup for the Lakers. Another trade that was out there that didn't quite make the splash of the other big ones, but I think could have an effect, especially come postseason, is the Clippers acquired Bones Highland from the Denver Nuggets. Now, Bones Highland, he's a bucket. That dude can score. Clippers give themselves a good scoring punch off the bench with Highland. I really like that pickup. I really do. Other trades, Jay Crowder was part of that KD package to Brooklyn. They have now traded him to Milwaukee Bucks. It was no secret that the Bucks were trying to get him from Phoenix. They couldn't work any deals out, but wherever he was going, the Bucks were going to try and make a deal to get him to Milwaukee, and they've done it. Patrick Beverley was all for getting D'Lo and reuniting the gang that he was with out in Minnesota, and then they traded him to Orlando for Mo Bamba. All right, Mo Bamba. You've probably seen him fighting Austin Rivers recently. Well, yeah, now he's going to be fighting in a Lakers jersey, so there you go. Look for that. Eric Gordon finally got out of Houston. Dude's been there forever. I think he's older than everybody on the team. That includes the coaches. He's been ready to leave Houston for about 2 to 3 years already. So good for him. He's out of there. But just as Eric Gordon leaves Houston, John Wall heads back to Houston, a place where he made a bunch of money just sitting at home because they didn't want him to play. He didn't want to play either. More of that might be coming. Who knows? Clippers also picked up Mason Plumlee, who a lot of people aren't talking about, but he's having a really good year out in Charlotte. Something like 12 and 10 he's averaging. Which aren't crazy numbers, but when you can bring a guy in that can produce like that, those are the type of players you want, especially whether it's coming off the bench. He'll be behind Zubac, sharing minutes with him, but those are the type of bodies you want and the type of players you want really around your superstars. And then another smaller trade that happened, the Warriors actually got rid of James Wiseman, all right? Traded him off to the Pistons. They get back Gary Payton Jr. The Hawks get Sadiq Bey, which is a good pickup for the Hawks. Bey's actually a solid pickup. I was talking about James Wiseman earlier this year with a friend. I was trying to say they needed to trade him to Chicago for Vucevic. He really wasn't finding any space in their rotation. The Warriors are in a win now position, and they don't have time for Wiseman to have to develop over the years. Just get what you can for him that can help you right now, and just cut your losses with him. I thought earlier in the year they could have gotten more. They waited until this trade deadline. Brought back Gary Payton Jr. I mean, he was a good spark plug off the bench for last year. We'll see how it goes this year, but I feel like, man, if they would have gotten rid of him earlier in the year, they probably could have gotten a lot more for Wiseman. And lastly, news that isn't news, John Collins is still with the Atlanta Hawks. Maybe next year, in year 4 of shopping you for trades. Maybe it'll happen next year. Maybe. You never know. What do you guys think of the trade deadline? Let me know in the comments. Did you like the moves your team made? Who do you think is the new favorite? Let me know in the comments. I gotta go refill my coffee. Y'all be good. Peace.